Well, hello and welcome to Module 9, Data Management and On-Farm Cultivar Testing, which is one of the modules that we've prepared as part of the training on organic cultivar testing in Work Package 2 of the Live Seeding project. And Live Seeding is a European project that's working to promote the systems and procedures to develop seeds that are organic for the organic market in Europe. And it's the successor to a project that was called Live Seed, that was also really all about working with the sector to develop organic pipelines for organic varieties. So, and a big part of that has been testing varieties on farms. So Work Package 2 is very much about organic cultivar testing on farms, and we've prepared these modules to help train people to do some of this testing. So I've worked and developed this in collaboration with my colleague Charlotte Bickler at the Organic Research Center, Frederic Ray and Ambrosio Costanzo from ITAB in France. So let's just quickly think about participatory on-farm cultivar evaluation trials and all the different aspects that really need to be covered to have successful trials. So you can see this graphic from one of the live seed outputs that had these 4 different aspects. And the modules that we've developed in Work Package 2 particularly focus on the experimental design part, which is Module 8, which hopefully you've already taken, and then Module 9 on data collection and management, the one we're in right now. So let's talk about this module in general first before we get into Unit 9.1. So this module is going to provide a general overview on data management, principles, and practice. It's going to cover how to manage data up to the analysis stage. So this is quite important to realize that in this module, we're not going to talk about statistical analysis of the data. We're going to talk about how to manage that data so that it's ready for statistical analysis, make sure it's in a format that's suitable, and that also that it could really be taken by anyone who wasn't even familiar with the project and analyzed. And that ties in with these principles of fair data that we're going to talk about a lot more in this module. So there's a specific focus on research data from on-farm cultivar evaluation trials, the types of data you might come across and how you might need to manage that data. We're also going to signpost or direct you to resources for more in-depth study of topics relating to data management. So the overall goal of the module is to provide guidance on how to manage data generated from on-farm cultivar evaluation trials so that it is fair and in a format ready for statistical analysis. And we'll talk a lot more about what we mean by fair data in this module. And at the end of the training, the trainee will be able to develop and implement a data management plan for their trials that follows these principles of fair data. They'll be able to manage their data in a format that's easy to understand and avoids obsolescence. So to make sure that the data you produce is going to be around for a while and that different people will be able to use it, and it won't be in a format that's not going to get out of date, let's say. And also that you've got all the information with that data so that anyone could take it and then use it to advance their understanding of the field of cultivar evaluation as well. Target learners are researchers or trial managers. And these are the learning objectives, which are a bit wordy, so I'm not going to read through all of those for you right now. But you should download the PowerPoint of these lecture slides, and then you'll have them to hand, and you can have a look at your leisure at these learning objectives. And you'll see sort of which units we're going to try and cover each of those objectives. And hopefully by the end of it, you will have achieved all of those learning objectives. So the module is structured in this way. So we have these first 2 units. And it's, the data management is quite sort of theoretical initially. It's really important that we all understand the terminology and the vocabulary and the sort of the theory and principles behind it. So that's why we do have 2 units that are quite theoretical, although we will have some practical stuff in those. And then we'll move on to practical examples, data collection tools, data repositories, documentation. And finally, we'll have this independent activity on a data management plan, which you should have acquired all the skills and knowledge that you need to do that by time you get to Unit 9.4. So Unit 9.1, just to cover what we're going to learn, how we're going to learn within this unit. So we're going to have a lecture, which is me talking to you as I am doing now, where we're going to look at what is research data, what types of data are used in on-farm cultivar evaluation trials. And then you'll have a break from me, and you'll have a chance to independently go and look at some learning materials that are available online from the University of Edinburgh, all about putting research data in context. And you should download the Word file that has some guiding questions for that, just to help you sort of pick out what the key points are from that bit of learning with the mantra research data in context unit. And then if we were working in real time, which sometimes we will be delivering these trainings live, then we'll have a chance to have a general discussion on the outcomes of that research data in context learning activity. If not, then you'll just have to reflect on your own and then come back to the second part of the lecture on Introduction to Data Management Plans. On to the key information in this unit. So first of all, what is research data? We're going to talk about the different types, categories, classifications of research data that you might be managing in your project. So what is research data? You can find many definitions online and in different resource materials for what it is. Here's one I found: facts, measurements, or observations collected during research to provide evidence for analysis and decision making. That's a pretty broad definition. I think it probably covers what we mean in this particular module about what is research data. It also could be records of farming activities and outcomes to monitor, learn, and improve decisions. So that's sort of more specific to on-farm research, where it might not only be design, trials, and experiments, but also more kind of contextual, observational information on how things are done on the farm. But all about data to help to monitor, learn, and improve decisions. And it's important in the context of this unit that we don't confuse data and information. I mean, they often are used interchangeably, but within the world of data science and research, we often talk about data as different from information. So data is not information until it's been analyzed, synthesized, and interpreted. Then it's actually turned into information that you can then use to make decisions, to decide if your hypotheses are correct, etc. So data on its own is just lots of data points, lots of numbers, lots of measurements, lots of observations, lots of text. So it's not information until it's been synthesized. And this is just a graphic from one of those outputs from the Live Seed project, one of the booklets on how we set up on-farm cultivar evaluation trials, just showing some of the different types of data that might be collected when evaluating cultivars. Things like cover or vigor of the crop, health of the crop, which in this particular framing has been included as agroecosystem data. Phenotyping on the left there, very common term you'll find when talking about breeding and cultivar evaluation. Phenotyping is all about just monitoring how a particular phenotype or variety or cultivar develops over the season. So phenology is about timing of when it reaches certain growth stages, morphology, all to do with measuring those traits about the size, shape, appearance of the particular genotype. And then productive data on the right, again, yield components. So in cereals, we often talk about yield components like 1,000 grain weight, number of grains per ear, number of ears per square meter, number of tillers per square meter, all these different components that go into the actual yield, to producing the actual yield in the field. And quality data, so there are things like processing, nutritional, organoleptics, so that's sort of to do with taste. Those sorts of data might be produced by outside groups, right? So the samples might be collected and sent off for analysis somewhere. So that's also a part of the data, right? And then this environment one on the left again, climate, soil type, rotation, crop management, all really related to how the conditions under which that particular crop was grown. And I guess later on we're going to talk about metadata, and also sort of research documentation. So these bits of data fall more into that category of, they're not going to be specific or different, let's say, for each individual cultivar. They're the general conditions under which it was grown and really important contextual information. Types of research data commonly used in cultivar evaluation trials. So on this slide, I'm just going to show you a few different examples of the many different ways we categorize or classify data. So on that table there, you can see text, numeric, multimedia. So sort of 3 different maybe formats we could say that data might be in. So text data, obviously words, and they might be words collected from sort of structured surveys or questionnaires, right? But they also could be just field notebooks, notes taken by the researcher. I'll talk a little more about this in a minute. Likewise, with these different types of numeric, quantitative, you'll see there are 4 different types there. Again, I'll talk a little more about these on the next slides. And then multimedia, photos, videos, audio recordings. So nowadays, more and more, we're using multimedia to record data. They're all different types of data. And maybe you can think of other examples that I haven't included there that might fall into one of those sort of types or classifications. And then here, this little box at the bottom, another way to classify data. So this is specifically for numeric data, and you may hear these more when you start to talk to people that analyze data and statisticians, because it's quite important to be aware of which of these sort of classes of data your data fits into, because it impacts on the methods used for statistical analysis. So categorical is sort of discrete groups, right? Groups, categories, just like it says, and you might have nominal, unordered categories. So that could be something like a color, let's say. You might have decided we're going to categorize the color of this crop into 5 different shades of green, light green, medium green, dark green, lime green. So a very clear, categories, but not in any particular order. Ordinal, categorical, are like ordered categories. So rankings is one. So first, second, third, tallest, second tallest, third tallest, ordered. And then Likert scales, again, specifically often used in surveys, for instance, around where you want, sort of there's a range of answers, but they have to be in the correct order. So from, very high to very low to medium in the middle. So those are Likert ones. Those are called ordinal. Numerical could be discrete still. So could be, a 1, 2, 3, 4 with nothing in between, like a count, for instance, or could be continuous. So something that's measured that really, let's say you're weighing something, might depend on how many decimal places you have on a scale. So those are sort of continuous. So something to keep in mind. You don't need to be an expert on that, but something to keep in mind, particularly when talking to statisticians who will be having this in mind when they choose the analysis. So let's look a little more closely at some of these types of data. So data, questionnaires and surveys, for instance. This isn't really a type of data, but it's a way data is collected. And you could, from questionnaires and surveys, have data that was free text, something like explain why you grow ancient grains, so an opinion. You might have Likert scale. So as I just mentioned, here's an example of a Likert sort of question. How likely are you to try new varieties? And you might have very unlikely at one end, very likely at the other, and maybe there's 5 of these groups. So, very unlikely, unlikely, no opinion, likely, very likely, often 5, but not always, but an odd number is often better. So there's kind of a middle answer that people can select. And nominal categorical, like I've just already mentioned. Here's an example of a question you might have on a questionnaire. What characteristic of wheat is most important for you when choosing a variety? And here's just 4 different categories, right? That wouldn't be in any particular order. But also questionnaires or surveys could be producing data that is measured values. So is a continuous even, or scores or ranking. And here's just another consideration with surveys and questionnaires about this whole additional layer of needing to consider ethics, consent, privacy, confidentiality, etc. Here's another interesting type of data, field notes, right? So often when you're in the field on your phone or in an old-fashioned notebook like I've shown there in the image, you might just want to make a note of something that you observe that you think could be useful to help you explain your results down the line, right? So that's text data to capture additional observations, not something that was in the protocol. So heterogeneous, difficult to process maybe. It's more, as I said, contextual, gives you background information. Still very valuable and useful, but that's another type of data that you might collect. And then the measured values we've talked about already. Here's a picture of one of my colleagues out in the field measuring with a meter stick, counting ears probably, provides homogeneous data, something like plant height, fruit weight, etc. Very common, suited to your standard typical statistical analyses, numerical continuous data. Scores, so something a little bit different. Traits are scored based on agreed protocols. So here again, this is an image actually on the right from some of our data collection protocols that we use in our wheat trials. And you can see that picture there in the bottom right there, which shows sort of a scoring system from 2 up to 8, in fact, here, but it could be from 1 to 5. These are called Likert scales. And you can score for qualitative traits like vigor. So that's what this image is that I'm showing here, where we'll compare at a given growth stage what that crop looks like and try and match it to one of those images. So which of these 5 images, say, does it match, and then assign it the score, in this case, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It could also be color charts or other media used as references. And in this case, these variables are ordinal or discrete variables. Rankings, another type of data. So in this case, putting your cultivars, for instance, if it's a cultivar evaluation trial, in order from best to worst. Which variety do I like the most? And this is quite often used in, for instance, when you've got farmers doing their own collection of data on a trial, asking them to rank the varieties. It doesn't always need detailed protocols or specialized tools. Again, ordinal, discrete data class. And we talked about this a little bit in Module 8 when we talked about those TRICO trials. In that case, farmers are always given just 3 varieties, or it might not be even varieties, 3 treatments it might be, and the farmers are asked to rank those. So that's sort of what's showing in this particular graphic here, that you've got a farmer with, let's say, these 3 treatments, and the colors of the treatments in this graphic. So in this little tiny picture here, you can see there's actually 5 different treatments that were used in this trial, but not every farmer got all 5. So this farmer got the red, the green, and the brown, and they had to rank them. This person got the blue, the yellow, and the brown, and they ranked them, etc. So that's just an illustration of a TRICO trial using data from rankings, and really powerful in that it's very easy to train and implement in the field. And if you have many participants, you can generate a lot of data. And then, as we talked about in Module 8, there is a recognized statistical approach to analyzing that data. So it's a really useful approach. Now more and more, we're also collecting data that's what we call geospatial data in field trials. So this is like georeferenced, that links a piece of information, piece of data with a specific location. Not always used for analysis, but as we have in the bullet points here, useful for georeference in fields, plots, and individual measurements. So in this example here, you can see there's several different plots been laid out in a field. It's useful if you want to go back to that field in future years, if you've done some georeferencing out there with some of the tools that will give you a GPS location for a plot, then you can find it again in future years, depending on how precise your GPS signal is. But you can get, if you have large plots, you can at least be fairly confident you can find your way to the middle of a plot and resample, let's say, if you want to do that. Soil scientists are often interested in doing that. And then, of course, you have image files. So, for instance, this is a I believe that's a satellite image, which shows you NDVI. So these sorts of data are increasingly available online for free, satellite imagery, or it might be an image taken using a camera from a drone. So it's just another type of data that we need to think about when we're writing our data management plan. Is it a sort of data we're going to be collecting? How are we going to store it, etc.? And the last type I'm going to talk about briefly is multimedia, so video, audio, and photos. So photos and videos of plots can be used to back up qualitative assessments, first of all. So let's say you've got a group of researchers uh, collecting vigor scores. So I showed you that earlier when we were talking about scores in our sheet that we use in the field for scoring vigor in variety cultivar evaluation trials. Well, maybe you've got a lot of people doing that scoring and you might want to calibrate, kind of check that everyone's using got the same kind of ranges so that a number 5 from one researcher is the same as a number 5 from another. So useful to collect actual photographs at the same time in the field from at least a few plots when you're doing those sorts of scoring. That's just one example of how you might use photos. But there's also, lots of cool image analysis software these days. So for instance, if you're trying to estimate percent cover of a crop, how much of the ground is covered by a crop, photographs might be taken directly above the plot, looking down, and then analyzed with software to see how much ground space, soil there is versus how much crop growth is. Videos sometimes are used too. Again, more contextual it might be, just sort of videos of the fields, what they look like at a given time. And of course, audio files are really useful for field notes or even interviews, right? So I hadn't mentioned that in my questionnaires and survey bit a few slides before this, but chatting with farmers informally or formally, semi-structured interviews are often done with a list of guiding questions. Again, that would you'd end up with audio files there. So many, many different ways that multimedia can now be used to collect data. Okay, so now we'll take a little break from listening to me and some self-directed learning. So we're going to take a look at this mantra training information from University of Edinburgh, and specifically one of their units that's called Research Data in Context. It's very quick and simple to listen to. There's a Word file you should have downloaded that gives you the link to that mantra Research Data in Context training unit. The instructions are on the Word file. So just do that now. Download that Word file, go over to the mantra link to the University of Edinburgh's material, and just have a look and a read and a listen to what's on there, and just learn a little bit more about research data in context. Great. So hopefully you've done that self-directed learning on research data in context. If we're meeting in person, we'll now take a little bit of time to talk through some of your reactions and responses to the questions. So we'll do that now. Okay, so on to the second part of this lecture, and this is all about data management planning. So how do we produce a plan, think in advance about all that data that we're going to collect, all the different types of data I just described to you, um, and how are we going to, manage that in a way that we get the most value out of it. Okay, so what is a data management plan? So you can see written on this slide a definition of a data management plan. I'll just read it for you. It's a formal document that outlines how a researcher intends to manage their research data during and after a project. And you can see a graphic, just part of it's obscured by my face, I think, but on the right there, just showing typical life cycle of data, right? Thinking about data that's generated and what happens to it throughout its life. Starting with creation, that's probably the obvious place to start. So all data is created, and that's the collection of data and all the different types that we just talked about earlier. Documentation, important part in the research life cycle of data. So we'll talk a little more about research data documentation in a minute, and about how it's important to really have explained every detail about how it was collected and what it means. Then use of the data, that's what's hidden by my head there. Storage, sharing, so important. We're going to talk about that in a minute, and preserving it, making sure it's in a format where it's going to be able to be used for many years to come. So that's just an example of a representation of what research data really is, and the life cycle of it. And now you should have downloaded this PowerPoint, so you should be able to present it and link with a live link, hyperlink through that short video phrase that's on this slide. So let's just do that on your own. Have a quick look at that video for a quick introduction to data management plans. So hopefully that was a useful just intro to data management plans from one organization, one perspective. And you'll find many other resources online about what data management plans are. And so you can have a look around and a read around. But basically, any organization funding research will require a data management plan. Any researcher really it makes sense to have one for a lot of different reasons. And I'll just go through some of them here. First of all, data quality and integrity. So how good is your data? We need clear procedures for how we collect, store, and document our data. And we also want to be sure that we don't have errors in our data. We don't want duplication of data or loss of valuable information. So we really want procedures that ensure that that data is top quality, accurate, correct, and that we can really believe in it and rely on it. So that's one of the reasons. Saving time and reducing risk, really important one that I think particularly researchers who've been around for a while, like myself, we're aware of the challenges with data if it's not been stored in a way that people understand what it is, what it means, if there's no protocol or system for storing it in a place where people can find it. Staff turnover is mentioned there. If someone moves on, the person who comes in to take over needs to know where that data is from before they arrived and what it means. So a data management plan can really help with that. Backup and preservation strategies is mentioned there. Yeah, delays, publication, funder reporting, archiving, all these, delays can happen if it's not easy to know, to find the data, easy to identify data for answering specific questions, etc. So it is really good. It takes a little time at the beginning of the project to write the plan, but then if everyone knows about it and follows those systems and methods, then there'll be a lot of time saved. And of course, facilitating collaboration. So if you've got multiple people wanting to use that data, you need everyone to know what the systems are, so they can work together closely and seamlessly. It also clarifies roles on who's responsible for different tasks, reduces confusion, all these reasons why it's really important. There's some typical examples really I've just shown here in some speech bubbles, things like where did I store that Excel file with soil test results? You know, if the results were generated maybe a couple of years ago and now it's year 3 of the project and you want to write a report, you'll think, oh, I know we did take soil tests, but where did we store those? That's a really common problem if you don't have a structured system for storing data. What does a variable mean? You know, I might have been put a little short form, this WHTGS61, in an Excel sheet at some point, and I might not remember what I meant by that. Does that mean wheat growth stage 61? Does it mean wheat height? Does it mean wheat tillers? What exactly did the WHT mean? Or anyone else looking at the data as well? No idea what WHTGS61 means. Where's the farm located? What's the soil type? What's the climate? Even a simple one like what year was the file collected? If you have a file named something like Farmer Brown wheat, which year was that data? And then, you know, supporting the data, how do we calculate the various, final variables? We might measure something in the field, like counting the number of plants in 50 centimeters of row. That's great. How do we turn that into plants per square meter, plants per hectare? So again, data management plans can provide that kind of documentation on how variables are calculated. So that's just some examples. Oh, who's going to produce the master file? That's about responsibilities, which I mentioned earlier, right? Who's responsible? So this is just a few examples of all the different questions and challenges that might come up in projects where a lot of data is being collected. Supports transparency and reproducibility. So this is all about making everything very, very easily accessible for researchers elsewhere that might want to repeat the experiments and that's going to really strengthen the credibility of your work if your experiments are easily repeatable. Enables reuse, right? So more and more we're sharing data, we're putting data out on open access platforms so anyone can go and use that data and make bigger data sets often. So meta-analyses, for instance, that's what we do in a meta-analysis, collect multiple data sets and reanalyze them to strengthen the evidence for a particular finding. This increases our scientific impact. It all links to this FAIR data, right? So we'll talk a little more about what's meant by FAIR, but it's all about data sharing. And also make sure your research data are more valuable for the wider community. And then ethical and legal requirements, again, always not so exciting for researchers maybe, but we need to make sure, especially anything that's data that involves personal data, names and addresses of people, for instance, we really need to make sure that we're covering ourselves and we're meeting ethical and legal requirements. And then also, it's just a fact of life as a researcher that any major funders are requiring data management plans in the proposals, or at least a task associated with a data management plan very early in the project. We know that journals, if you're going to publish in peer-reviewed journals, are looking for that the data sets are shared more and more. So it just is really standard professional practice these days. As this last one says as well, all about opening opportunities for data citation, etc. All of these. Right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty of what we might put in a data management plan. So this is an outline of a template that's also available in Word for you to download. And you might have noticed on one of my earlier slides, I did reference AI in this lecture. And there's, of course, loads of different AI tools out there that can help you in producing templates for data management plans. I would never suggest that you use AI to write your plan, right? But what it is useful for is giving you templates. So I used AI even to ask AI what was a suggested template for a data management plan in agriculture, and then I've modified it a bit. So I didn't follow it completely, but just for the sake of transparency, have used it to get a general structure, and then I've tweaked it a bit to, I think, meet the needs that we might have in cultivar evaluation trials. But not surprising, you would start with your project title, your description, your objectives, just to kind of provide the context to anyone reading the plan, and even to make sure that the whole team is on the same page in terms of what you think you're doing and why you're doing it. It would certainly flag things up if everyone didn't agree with the objectives. You better, at that stage, have a bit of a conversation and make sure we can align those with what everyone thinks we're doing. Types of data, so we just talked about that earlier, right? All the different kinds of data. So a good idea to think in advance, what types of data will you be collecting? And sometimes you might have not thought of something like, photos. A lot of people don't think about it. And then, if you sort of sit back and start to write a plan and realize, oh, we will be collecting photos, then that would lead on to later in the plan. Well, how are we going to store those photos? How are we going to name them? Photos are a really classic one where they'll come off a device with an unintelligible name. And in the future, someone might want to find a picture to illustrate something, and there's no way of knowing unless they troll through hundreds of images, or if we want to link a photo with a specific location so it's actually part of the data that's going to be analyzed, need to think about naming and that sort of thing. That's just an example. Formats, right? So spreadsheets, databases, shape files for GIS data, all these sorts of formats again. And you could envision maybe a table actually in the data management plan that has one column with the types of data and another column next to it with the format, right? So, geospatial data is that shape files, interview data is that text files, numeric data is that spreadsheets, etc. So, this is supposed to be general, right? So it's not the specific files, but just the general types of data. They should be interoperable, right? So interoperable is the I in FAIR. We're going to come on more to what FAIR is in Unit 2, but that's this type of data we're trying to, or this principles we're trying to align with. So if you might only be working in one trial, but even if you've just got one trial, it's still important to have this data management plan in place. And it might only be one page, right, if it's something that's simple. But if you're part of a project, a larger network with multiple trials, multiple partners, then should be written to cover all of the trials in the network. So at that sort of level. So you wouldn't have a separate data management plan for each trial in the network. You would have sort of a general approach you're going to use in a network, or let's call it a project. Section 2 would be data collection and documentation. And here, a long list of different kind of subheadings you might have within that, or at least topics to consider. They might not all apply in every case. Collection methods, so Fieldbook app just is one example, which we're actually going to look at in Unit 3 of this module. So an app to collect the data, data quality assurance, metadata standards. Again, we're going to talk a little more about metadata in Unit 2. But you could provide maybe a template for metadata collection that would be appropriate for different data sets. The metadata is that kind of general descriptive information about the data set. And again, when we get to Unit 2, I'll show you in more detail what sorts of characteristics of that data set you would need to describe. But it's not data recorded from the trial per se. It's more general descriptive information. Version control, yeah, how raw and clean data sets are tracked. So that raw data is what you collected in the field, and you probably want that somewhere as your original data set just in case everything goes wrong and you need to start again. But you'll also have this cleaned data which has been checked, outliers have been removed, errors have been corrected, and maybe some new variables have been calculated from what was measured in the field, etc. File naming rules. So what is going to be a good file naming system that's going to ensure the content of the file is easily identifiable? I was talking about that earlier in the justification for the data management plan. Just an example there, you can see it looks really long, but I guess it would provide all the information for someone who wasn't, hadn't created the file maybe. What's the project? Where was it collected? When? or when was the file created, what sort of data is it, the file type, and then versions, right? So a lot of us, myself included, I like to, if I've changed something in the file, put, a new version, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to gosh knows how many different numbers. Uh, and then for sharing data as well. Interesting that it's CSV file there. We're going to get to that a little bit more later in the unit and the module, but just the idea of using a format that's not actually linked to a specific software package, because software packages can go out of date. So CSV is sort of a universally recognizable format, right? So that's why we might recommend using saving files as CSVs. And then, of course, variable naming uh, conventions. Again, sorry, my head's obscuring that. Possibly a link to a data dictionary. So this is, yeah, how are we going to name those variables? So again, earlier in this talk, I provided an example of a variable that was called WHT gross or GS61. That's not a standard variable name that anyone might recognize, but ICASA is an organization that has standard variable names. So you could, in your data management plan, make a list of all the variables you expect to report and have a sort of a data dictionary as an appendix, or at least reference the standard dictionary you're going to use, like ICASA. Data storage and backup. Where is the data going to be stored? Just a picture there of cloud storage with my head being the cloud, or yeah, a central server. So where's it going to be stored? Institutional server, cloud service, or is it just going to be stored on local drives? Who has access? How frequent are things backed up? Not very exciting, I know, for researchers, these sorts of questions, but useful to write down somewhere. There's an online article there, again, linked, just one of many you can find all about information on systems of data storage that you can click through and read on your own time. And here we have this FAIR, which I've been mentioning already in this lecture. This is what FAIR actually stands for. So data sharing, FAIR is sort of the universal principles now that we use globally with data, about data being findable. We're going to talk again more about this, as I said, in Unit 3. DOIs being assigned, so that's sort of a unique identifier for data sets. Accessible, so open access usually, right? But again, this needs to be addressed in the data management plan. Interoperable, as I just mentioned earlier about file formats like CSVs that are sort of, not linked to a specific software, and reusable. So that's what FAIR means. We will talk more about FAIR again later in this module. But really, the whole FAIR concept and principles are kind of underlying one of the key reasons why data management plans are so important and really being required more and more, because funders want data to be fair, to meet these four principles. Oop, and something happened with my animation there. I mentioned already, roles and responsibilities listed there, who collects it, and what resources are needed to make sure that everyone has the skills to do that. Preservation and long-term access. So which data sets will be preserved long-term, which might be destroyed. So that mentions there about ones with personal data may not be retained or may be made completely anonymous or destroyed at some point. And then repositories. Again, there's another unit coming up in Unit 2 where we're going to talk more about data repositories. So this is where the data is actually stored to be accessible. So there are quite a lot of free repositories out there that are provide data that might be considered. So good to specify in the data management plan, good to show that you've thought ahead where you're going to deposit that data to make it accessible, fair. Ethics, GDPR compliance, as I mentioned, all these sorts of points would need to be covered. We'll talk about this in Unit 2 a little more. All of these different kind of aspects to make sure that we're not risking sort of releasing personal data. and then how long is it kept. And even, yeah, in some cases, there will be a data protection officer within the institution that you work for or within your project who is the person who's sort of the one who's really got oversight over this whole personal data and making sure it's being stored correctly. Okay, so that's everything that I'm going to cover in this lecture today. And I realize it was a little bit dry maybe because it was quite theoretical on the data, what research data is, and then the whole topic around data management plans. So in units 2, 3, and 4, we're going to get a little more of the theory, but then we will move into more practical examples. And this is the live seeding project, all the organizations that are involved.